I think it's becoming very difficult for Scientology to recruit new people, but at the same time, first of all, I want to point out Scientology has only ever appealed to a very small percentage of the population. Okay, what does Scientology offer? We have certainty. We have certainty to make sure your life goes a certain way. Somebody says that to me, I'm looking for where the exit is. Okay, it just doesn't always appeal. But not only does it always only appeal to a certain small number of people, but people are more informed about Scientology. The brand is toxic, and it's getting harder for them to find people that don't at least have some opinion going in. But I wanted to point out, however, that Scientology still, in this day, has the power to bring people in and suck them in very quickly. I did some stories about a young woman from Australia who was a dancer that hurt herself and was very depressed because she hurt her knee. And if you're a dancer, I mean, that's, and so she was out of commission for a while. She was very depressed, and a friend of hers recommended Dianetics. And within a year, she was talking to her boyfriend about joining the Sea Org. And it split them up as a couple. She's completely separated from everyone she ever knew. And I wanted to do that story as a cautionary tale that I know we all tend to think that the word is out and Scientology is a laughing stock in the public, but there are still young people that can be pulled in. While I was doing that story, Chuck Beatty did a wonderful thing and talked to me about two other young women who had recently gotten into Scientology. They went from hearing about Dianetics for the first time to signing a billion-year Sea Org contract in a month.
The membership is one of the great myths of Scientology. That, as I said yesterday, it went from 150,000 books sold in 1950 to 38 people on the PDC. And it stayed that way until the Anderson Report. Because the Anderson Report in Victoria, Australia in '63 made it scandalous. And suddenly people started coming in. I talked to so many people who, when the Sunday Times were reporting in '67 on Aleister Crowley and the Black Magic connection, who told me, yeah, I read about that, and I'm really interested in Crowley, so I joined Scientology. There's also a very broad demographic that they will recruit through business technology, they'll recruit through counseling, through a religion, that, whatever it is that's ruining your life, the communication course will solve it. But I don't think the membership has ever got beyond perhaps 100,000 from the 60s to the present day. The only internal report I've seen on membership was from '97, where they were boasting that they had 25,000 paid up members of the IAS. I think Jeff, with the sales of Dianetics, got up maybe up to 40,000, but and then South Park and Anonymous, that if you're 19 and a Scientologist said, would you like a free personality test, they get their iPad out and have a look, and they watch the South Park episode. That's lost them credibility. So now they're actually praying. That a friend told me a year ago that one of his friends, who's a wealthy member, he said, we were both called a couple of years ago and offered free auditing. And he said, there's no way I'm taking free auditing, because that doesn't exist. But his friend was still naive enough to do this. And what was the free auditing? The free auditing was a security check to ask why his children hadn't joined the Sea Org. So they're now preying on their own members. And of course, that, if you look at Hubbard, he says there's this thing called the cycle of action. Birth, growth, conservation, decay, and death. And what I'd say is they're now in the decay section. It's like if you don't eat, your body will digest its own organs. At the moment, Scientology is digesting its own organs.
Okay, other questions? Okay, Alexander, come on over. You can pass it to the next person.
Okay, I will. Maybe I just can comment a little bit on the membership claims. And it's interesting because they're trying to sit on two chairs simultaneously. Well, when time for my presentation will come, I'll show like a little Russian book which was published just recently and was ordered and paid for by Scientology. And on 2 pages next to each other, they have 2 contradicting claims. One says that Scientology membership in Russia is nearly 900,000. On the next page, it says that now you could see that Scientology is so small and insignificant that it cannot possibly harm anybody. So it's not a threat to anybody. So it's like that.
The truth is somewhere between the two. It's small and insignificant, but it can still harm people.
There you go.
Yeah. But anyhow, of course, I believe, well, and I'll provide you my calculations. I believe that membership in Russia is no more than 5,000 if you count it very liberally, actually, probably less.
We have a census in Britain every 10 years, and in the 2011 census, just over 2,000 people claim to be Scientologists. And you can bet that figure's hokum, because they'll have said, well, my dog's a Scientologist, and what have you. There were 300,000 people who claimed to be Jedi, the fastest growing religion in the world.
Okay. All right, next, somebody else have a question? Okay, Jerry, is that Jerry? Yeah, come on over. You can grab this.
Got Steve back there would like to
Steve, where are you?
go next.
I need the exercise, Steve. I'll be back.
It's true.
Paulette and I go back to 1982. That's the first time that I ever met her, and that was at the famous Clearwater hearings. And I knew of her as far back as when I was on the ship in the mid-1970s, because I was on public relations, intelligence lines, as they say, and you were a known enemy at that time. I had your book in the Hubbard archive, so I knew of you, I knew of Bob Kaufman. I was, except for the Guardian's office, who obviously had all the N Theta books, I knew about you during that period. And not long after I escaped, which was the end of 1981, so by May of 1982, that's when I met you, albeit very briefly, and through Mike Flynn, who's the attorney that we both shared for a period of time. And we have discussed this before, and Tony knows about it, and it's also taken up in the book. And I came here prepared to talk to you and to actually ask you, which I did when we spoke briefly yesterday evening or the evening before. When you were contacted by Scientology, you contacted by Scientology, and the settlement was in play, which was in February of 1985. At that time, I was up in Oregon, Portland, preparing for the Julie Christopherson trial. And I was staying with one of the attorneys on that case, Gary McMurray. And I remember receiving a telephone call from Mike Flynn and talking about you had settled with the Scientologists and that you had signed one or more affidavits. And to me, this was just an incredible betrayal. And I was so devastated, and I was alone at the time in McMurray's house, and I wrote about, internalize that, and then what I often do is write down in my papers or journals or whatever what was going on. And it was truly devastating, and I was hurt beyond belief. Not long after that, then there was the Julie Christopherson trial, during which the Scientologists broke the news that my relationship with Mike Rinder, Dan Sherman, David Kluge was all a setup, so I was similarly treated like you were. And that betrayal drove me right to the edge of suicide. And there have been, in dealing with Scientologists over the years, that's their deal. Get people to betray others and get them to state something which is untrue, that hooks them in, that makes them thereafter not credible as witnesses, and it really hurts, whoever is the recipient or who still is carrying on the fight. And not long after that, 1985, and Tony wrote about this as well, the Scientologists brought your affidavit concerning what Flynn had told you into my case. They were trying to get Flynn investigated criminally. And again, this was devastating for me. Also, they took your affidavit and turned it into a press release. They gave it to UPI. UPI put it on their lines. There was media that came out of that. And then I discovered in my settlement with the cult was in 1986. And not long after that, I discovered again they had used your affidavit in the Church of Scientology technology versus US, one of the tax cases at that time. And then recently, I discovered that they had used your affidavit in their submission to the IRS on which the tax exemption is based. And I really came here thinking I would ask you if you would, correct the record, because obviously what they put in front of you to sign is untrue. It doesn't match with reality at all. I fully understand. They did the same with me. I signed an affidavit which is absolutely ludicrous. It's shameful. I was put in a position where there was nothing else I really could do just to save my own attorney and to save all these other people. Scientology promised to end fair game. In talking to you and then thinking about it later, I thought, you really are not the right target for this. The IRS record does need to be corrected. Scientology did get their IRS tax exemption on the basis of false statements, unlawful false statements to them that the IRS accepted. But it is really the Scientologists and their attorneys who knew what they were putting in front of you in a situation where you had no option but to sign. You were under incredible pressure. You were desperate to get out. From my perspective, you're fully forgiven for that. You're an undeniable heroine.
I'm not sure what the question is.
No, I'm getting.
But I will say that if the IRS did not, they gave them their tax exemption for a million reasons, of which my affidavit, I am sure, did not play even one iota. But if I thought that the IRS would reverse their position if I wrote an affidavit denouncing my original affidavit, give me the pen. I would sign it right this second, okay? So I will tell you, you seem to think that the courts hold a lot of weight to any affidavit. Let's not discuss mine because I don't discuss my settlement, all right? The courts, I have been assured more than once, hold toilet paper in higher esteem and regard than an affidavit that Scientology lawyers present.
They held.
Let's ask a question, Jerry. There's others that want to ask.
Well, the question is, would I reverse it? And I said that if I thought that would change the situation with the IRS, I would do it immediately.
it actually is cumulative. So I must do it. The other people who were subject of who the Scientologists black PR'd and lied about in their submission, all of us must do it. You're one person. It is not going to depend on one person coming forward. It is dependent on a lot of people coming forward. You are, in a sense, an important person in all of that because of what they put you through, because of their use of it for that purpose. So, the person who really should do this is the guy who knowingly put a document in front of you to sign, and the guy behind that, underneath David Miscavige, is Marty Rathbun. Tony talked in his book about Rathbun running Farney, who contacted you. Rathbun was behind the creation of false affidavits. Rathbun was intimately involved in the submission of these things to the IRS. So, my question is really to Tony, and that is, you have, Rathbun's one of your sources, Rinder is one of your sources. For 2 or 3 years ago, in speaking to me, you said, be patient, I'm going to talk to these guys. You probably remember then. Okay, about the Jerry Armstrong case, about their fair gaming of me, about acts against me, which significantly in this age includes what they filed in the IRS. So my question is to you, what have they said about this?
Yeah. I have talked to Rinder a little bit about the Jerry Armstrong operation, and I'd really like to write a story about that. And it's you have been very patient, Jerry, and I'd like to get into that. As far as Rathbun and the IRS, I agree with you. I think Marty Rathbun writing, because remember, it was the October 1993 event that was featured in Going Clear, where you see David Miscavige bragging about him and Rathbun walking into the IRS office. So if there's anybody that should have some influence on peeling back that decision, you would think it'd be Marty Rathbun. I think Marty's in a really interesting transition moment right now. He didn't even come to New York for publicity on that movie. I think he's gotten to the point now where he's feeling a little overwhelmed and is backing. I'm having a hard time even getting him on the phone right now. So I think he's having some, I think he's rethinking exactly what his role is going to be. I think it would be great if he was to talk to the IRS. On the other hand, I look at the nonprofits that lose tax-exempt status, that the IRS comes down on, and I think to myself, don't you think the IRS could ask a question like, please explain to us how $10,000 a week to have private investigators follow your father is the use of tax-exempt money for a religious purpose. I think the IRS could remove Scientology's tax-exempt status tomorrow if it wanted to, based purely on the multiple ways Scientology violates its secret agreement every day. So while you're right, we could go back to the very beginning and look at the documents that were used in that agreement, get Marty Rathbun on to submit an affidavit. They don't even need to go that far. The IRS just simply needs to act. And I think I wrote this morning that I think the biggest problem is inertia. Because as Mike Rinder once said to me, the problem that any government official has in making this decision about should we reopen this, should we go after this, is that politician, that bureaucrat has to make a calculation. Am I ready for this to be the rest of my career? Because you can't just say, okay, this year we're gonna deal with Scientology, then we'll move on. You have to really make that calculation. And Alex Gibney's doing his best right now. I don't know if you all know this, but behind the scenes, he's really pushing government officials because that film has had a huge effect. And I think that may be the most, the best chance there is. But I agree with you, Jerry, that Marty Rathbun should file an affidavit about something like this.
Let me say, When I talked with the IRS, which was actually in 1991, the agent I sat with, and I didn't really exchange any information with them, they'd already got it. The guy I sat with said, Scientology is the first case in the history of the IRS where over 1,000 agents have been involved. And this is before the 2,400 suits. So at that time already, the IRS, which is a religious cult, let's face it, was entrenched trying to do something about this. And of course they walked away with what, $12 million?
$12 million instead of $1 billion.
Yeah. So you have this peculiar situation of them just going, we just don't want to do this anymore, you know? And you're worn down. The other thing which I pick up from what you say, and I agree with what you're saying, I'm unusual, and I may be the only person who was defeated before signing a settlement with them, so they have nothing from me. You know, I had a lawyer who was trying to negotiate money from them. I had to take her out of the room and say, you have to ask me first. I don't want to do this. I don't want to take money from them. I have no interest in that. But let me point to a document that is on the record, and that's the suppressive person declare of Neville Chamberlain, not the famous British Prime Minister, but the famous Scientologist. And it says that Neville Chamberlain, before he entered Scientology, had been guilty of pimping, violence for hire, and drug dealing. And this was one of the last public SP declares, and it shows you the way they seek to demean people and disable their future comment. There's just something I'd like to point out. Neville Chamberlain was 8 years old when he had his first auditing session. So he'd already been convicted, apparently, for violence for hire, pimping, and drug dealing. His parents were both friends of L. Ron Hubbard. Nev told me, well, what actually happened was one day Jane Kember, the Guardian, said, write up your overts, Nev, and he went, okay. But there's no regard for the truth. You know, Russell Miller again, he was a stranger to the truth. There's just this oppressive idea of controlling and destroying people and, you know, making it go right.
So very briefly, I just want to thank you, Tony, for writing Paulette's story. I'm halfway through the book. It's moving. And I want to thank you, Paulette, publicly for helping me when I first got out of the Moonies. My question, it's going to be short, but first a quick comment. I think Tony's blog was able to do what it's been able to do because of your professionalism, the fact that you are an editor, and it had the credibility because you had very high standards for what you were writing and how you were writing it. And it's really been a magnet for bringing together all of the events of the last few years. So my question is really about the role of whistleblowers and journalists and the media, and how really it's I think, one of the hopes of civilization that there are truth tellers and whistleblowers who can tell the truth. And what thoughts you may have about how we can change the system. I mean, there's the internet now, but there's lots of small little sites, but how to really change the culture other than the bean counters of the major media sources that are afraid of getting sued. Just whatever you want to say about the subject would be appreciated.
I appreciate that, Steve. I mean, I would say that the major change that we've seen, and I think it's hurt Scientology a lot, is that, you know, when Richard Bahar was writing for Time Magazine in 1991, I was just talking to somebody that, I'm looking into that period now, and he had to work so hard, as Paulette did in her day, just to find people to talk to about this stuff. And then they told you something, well, you needed to go to a library to look up information to track that down. And then once you got that material together, Paulette, when her first article was finished, it wasn't published by the first magazine she approached. She had to approach a number of them. She had to approach a number of publishers to get her book out. And, you know, people like Johnny Jacobson and Steve Kinane can tell you about what it's like to deal with editors and and lawyers. And Scientology has always counted on this. Scientology has always counted on the idea that any reporter that comes in the door is going to have to deal with an editor and lawyers, and that's who they go to try to get a story squelched. And I remember when I was with New Times Los Angeles, and I had written, in Phoenix I had written about Rick Ross and Jeff Jacobson. In LA I'd written about Robert Cipriano and Tori Crispin. My colleague Ron Russell had written the Lopez story, the famous ostrich egg story. And Scientology was just really confused. At one point, Moxon said to me, "You've written your story. What are you doing?" And see, they were so used to that idea that a newspaper, it's so difficult for a newspaper to do a Scientology story that you do the story and then you never hear about it again, which is still true for most mainstream publications. You will not see the word Scientology in the New Yorker magazine probably for another 20 years, right? They did their Scientology story. The thing that has changed now is that you don't need to work for the New Yorker or Time Magazine to put something out that has a lot of impact and can actually break major news. Because of the internet, because of multiple websites, this is the big difference now, is that the whistleblower doesn't need to find a reporter who has a brave editor, who has a smart lawyer. We've eliminated all that. The whistleblower can go directly to the internet. Now, I still recommend that you come to me so I can help you vet it and clean it up and verify it, and because I want the bunker to have the first publication. So I recommend to all you potential whistleblowers to come to me. But it's just so much easier for that information to get. And it's, you know, I don't know if David Miscavige ever finished OT3 because he's not immune from overwhelm. I mean, they're being overwhelmed.
One thing about the whistleblower, first of all, I don't know whether you all know, but Steve Hassan was one of the early, very, very courageous people who took on the Moonies. And we worked together when we were practically the only ones. I was taking on Scientology, he was bravely taking on the Moonies. One thing I think that would really help as far as whistleblowing in the United States is this whole thing where anybody can sue for anything and you have to pay a fortune to defend yourself. And I know that the tort lawyers keep fighting to not change things, but it's a really, really bad system in this country that discourages people because they know that, you know, they can tell the truth, but there's going to be lawsuits and they're going to have to spend a lot of money. At least in England, if you sue somebody, you pay their costs if you lose. But of course, the way they got around that with me was that when it got close to court, they dropped the suit and then they reinstituted again. So I had to pay for the lawyers all over again. But it's still a better system than we have here, which is that.
By this country and by here, you mean the United States.
The United States, yes. Oh, right, I'm sorry. I forgot that I'm in Canada. I was sued in Canada also. But England has a much better system than the United States where anybody can sue for anything.
We wear Canada like a hat. Wasn't it Reagan that said that?
I'm not putting the Canadians out.
Blame Canada.
I don't
South
know the
Park
Canadian
said
system.
that.
Unfortunately, Nan does because of all these
the English
suits.
system, unfortunately, part of our tightening our belts is that legal aid has gone, so that it's actually incredibly difficult to be in court against anybody anymore.
That's good.
I'd just like to, say that the new situation. I mean, when I came to republish Blue Sky, Arnie Lerma said, before the internet, before safety in numbers, there was John Atack, and Jerry was there, Lawrence Wallersheim, there were a few of us, but some very brave individuals, Tilman Hausherr, Karen Spank, and Andreas Heldel-Lunt, who's in the room today. They are the people that pioneered this, and they took the flak for it. I mean, Karen fought so many lawsuits. Dennis Ehrlich was. So, a round of applause for them for actually making that possible.
Pete has a question.
Yeah, a quick question, and it may have already been answered in part. But first, thank you for being here, everybody, not just the guys on the stage, and thank you for everything that every one of you do. I noticed earlier when John mentioned that Scientology was in a kind of a decay period. I saw you nodding, Tony. What makes you think that?
grasp of the audience.
You know, I do my best to try to find hard numbers and data, and it's not easy. But I got to hand it to Mike Rinder. The focus of his blog specifically is things like staffing and internal messages. Some of it's only anecdotal, but say, for example, one of the most remarkable things he's had on his blog was an email sent out by the OT committee in Los Angeles. And they had invited one of these barnstormers, I don't know if it was Michael Chan or these other guys that go from org to org and get everyone pumped up about OT. And they had scheduled something at LA org. And what we got was this email from this angry OT committee member woman who was saying, you know, we sent out an email to every OT8 in Los Angeles, and we've only heard back from 6 of you, and we need you to be there.
We need the other 6 to be there.
And it was so remarkable because there have to be more OTs in the LA area than anywhere else on earth, and they can't get any of them to even answer an email about coming to an event. I think that's a pretty good sign of decay. And then what Mike found out was that ASHO was combining day and foundation, which is a alphabet soup of jargon to anybody outside. But what it means is one of the most significant facilities at the Scientology headquarters in Los Angeles, which is supposed to deliver the St. Hill Special Briefing Course, which is how you go clear, had combined its daytime and evening staffs into one because they don't have enough business. They don't have enough customers. And this is not some random mission somewhere or an org in a second or third tier city. This is one of the most significant facilities in the international administrative headquarters in Los Angeles, the biggest concentration of Scientologists in the world. So I think there's just undeniable evidence that beyond the fact that we're trying to convince people there's only 40,000 and 10 million, but even those 40,000 aren't showing up to things. You know, when the Flag building was opened 2 years ago, this was the most significant opening of a facility in 20 years for Scientology. They had been raising money for that since the early 1990s. And it finally opened in November 2013. Every Scientologist in the world who could get there got there. And so they filled the streets of Clearwater with 2,500 people, including Tom Cruise and John Travolta. So, and the way we know that is that Michael Bennett rented a helicopter with Mike Rinder, and they went up, and we got a perfectly clear shot of the street with everybody inside. And this is the best thing about the bunker. Our readers are so obsessive. Somebody literally counted every individual and came up with 2,500. So they just, you know, they of course said they had 10,000. I think there's multiple lines of evidence that suggest that this small organization is having a hard time keeping things together. That doesn't mean that David Miscavige is in any trouble because he's sitting on a mountain of cash and he's protected by attorneys and that kind of thing.
Yeah, a dinosaur is a large animal with a very small brain. The other thing is when you're counting the numbers, you've got to include the body thetans. So,
7 minutes left.
Jesse?
Yes, I just have a quick comment for Paulette, and then I have a question for you, Tony. For Paulette, I mean, I've sit in this conference and I heard so many people refer to her as their first contact with after they decided to either get out or needed help or were being attacked by Scientology. So I just wanted to say my little bit about that with Paulette. I was under attack myself. I had death threats and FBI calling, FBI agent following me to make sure nothing happens to me, 2 Scientologists following him, and it was just crazy. And it was so stressful for me at that time that I couldn't even go to a grocery store to do simple things like shopping without having people just right there in my face. And Paulette was a person that spoke to me about that on the phone. She said, you know, it's tough. It's tough. These guys are tough. What they're putting you through is unconscionable, but you just hanging in there. You're doing good work. And just for that little encouragement, because I've said in so many meetings, we got to get Paulette. You know, I've sat in so many meetings with Miscavige and the lawyers, and they're going over the roster of people, the Jerry, the Paulette, the this one and the that one. We got to get them, we got to get them, we got to get them. And then to have you talk to me in that way helped tremendously, and I just want you to know that. And now, my comment and question to Tony. Back in this same time period, I was involved in quite a bit of lawsuits. I helped with the Wallersheim case, the Ehrlich case, some other guy that Scientology was ripping. I can't even think of all the cases that I was working on at the time. But my situation was a little strange because I was in and I was a big boss. I was very high. It took me 6 years after that just to get my mind back to be able to freely associate with people. And I did that. I came out and I did the best that I could to explain to people and tell people what had happened. That was very difficult to do. I went to as many people as I could and apologized for things I had personally been involved in. But what happens, like a person like Mike Render, a person like Marty Rathburn, or a person like myself or anyone else, you get somebody that's been in and then they get out. And I know it all has to do with presence of mind, but even as I was trying to help people that I had harmed, I was brutally attacked, denigrated by others. You know, it's like the people that you're trying to help are trying to hurt you actively now because you hurt them before. And that is something that I had to fight through and to keep doing anyway. But I noticed this still happens with people that have gotten out and they've been in a position that they've harmed people. Generally, it's like a crowd mentality, a mob mentality. Oh, there's the bastard, hang him, you know? And
we only have a couple minutes. Give me a question, Jesse.
You've done excellent with calming that down, but I just want to know, what advice can you give anyone that follows the subject, because it is so interesting, about treating people that are new and getting out and making an attempt to do something?
It's, you know, the internet is wild and woolly, and I think that the Underground Bunker and the Village Voice before it, I was very fortunate that people actually talk to each other rather than over each other, and they have conversations. But it can be a little bit rough. I actually banned one commenter simply because every single new person that showed up, this guy assumed they were OSA or whatever and just jumped down their throats and quizzed them. And I said, how am I going to get any new readers if that's the greeting people got? And so I've banned very few people. Mostly the people I've banned are men who were abusive to women on the site. But that one person I banned because he was so abusive to new people. But I think this is why so many ex-Scientologists don't speak out at all, or it takes them years, because they realize, I think at some point, that outside of the bubble of Scientology, L. Ron Hubbard and Dianetics gets very rough treatment. And it can be difficult for them to enter into that conversation because they want to criticize Miscavige, but they don't want to hear criticism of Hubbard, and that can be very difficult for them. All I can say is that privately, when people approach me privately, I'm always very open to whatever they want to say, and when people are in that position where they just want to talk about the problems of the church today and they don't want to hear criticism of Hubbard, I don't criticize Hubbard to them. It's not, what's the point? So I try my best in private to support those people and bring them out. And keep in mind, for every Tori Chrisman or Spanky Taylor or Len Zimberg you hear about on my website, there are 20 or 30 other people that I don't tell you about, that are contacting me privately, who want to tell me about their family that's been ripped apart, but they can't go public yet. So there are many, many more people that are in that position that we just never hear from. And I think we're out of time.
Yeah, we're out of time.
Thank you.
Thank you.